ever feel that because you can't put your face up, therefore you won't be coming to class. Come to class, but also good if you can put the face up. Okay, here we go. So first of all, let's look at text. Chapter 3. I'm going to read through very quickly the Hebrew English, primarily the English, just to get us the text in the text, and then we're going to start looking at commentary. Saul had a concubine named Ritzpah, and Ish Boshet, the king, son of Saul, said to Avner, "Why have you lain with my father's concubine?" This was last time. Avner was very upset by what Ish Boshet said, and he replied, again, Avner does not deny, he does not agree, concede. All we know is he's upset. Am I a dog's head from Judah? In other words, would you speak that way to the dog catcher of this country, or even the dog catcher of King David? Here I've been loyally serving the house of your father Saul and his kinsfolk and friends. I've not betrayed you into the hands of David, though I could, because I'm the one that's sustaining you. Yet this day you reproach me over a woman? May God do thus and more to Avner. That's a form of taking a solemn vow. He's saying he's taking a vow, if I do not do for David as the Lord swore to him. He's taking a vow as a result of what just happened now, what you just accused me of, rightly or wrongly. I'm turning over to David, and I'm going to fulfill God's vow that he be king of Israel, to transfer the kingship from the house of Saul, and to establish the throne of David over Israel and Yehudah from Dan to Beersheba. And reminding you once again, the map of Israel, Dan to Beersheba. Dan is all the way to the north in Israel, northernmost point up at Mount Hermon, near modern-day Syria, already parallel to Tyre and Lebanon, all the way north from Dan to Beersheba, which is down in the Negev on the very bottom, the entire country. So I will make him king from Dan va'ad Beersheba, so that what has been the kingship till now, where the pink has been the tribe of Judah, where David was king, and all this green were the other 11 tribes over which Ish Boshet has been king, all the 11 tribes. Now I'm going to make it all one country under King David. Ish Boshet could say nothing more in reply. He basically was afraid, and that was it. He was like a university president at Columbia, at Harvard. Can't say anything, can't do anything. He's finished. He was so intimidated by Avner, he basically let Avner take it from there. If Avner is going to unite the country and give away the House of Saul, he had no one with whom to fight Avner. He understood that was it. Avner immediately sent messengers to David saying, "To whom shall the land belong? Make a pact with me, and I will help you and bring all Israel over to your side." Again, we learned this last week. That's why I'm not even reading it in Hebrew. Just want to quickly refresh our memory because it's been about a month. He replied, David said, "Good, I'll make a pact. But there's one demand first. Do not appear before me unless you bring Michal, daughter of Shaul, when you come before me." That's why I did this introduction, so we all quickly can figure it all out together. David also sent messengers to Ish Boshet. So this is really not surreptitious, undercover. This is way in the open. "Give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the price at the time." Talked about it. So Ish Boshet sent and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. And we went through that. Avner had conferred with the elders of Israel, saying, "You have wanted David to be king over you all along. So now act. For the Lord has said concerning David, I will deliver my people Israel from the hands of the Philistines and all its other enemies through my servant David." Note, by the way, God refers to him as his servant, David Avdi, my servant David. That's a big compliment when God says you are his servant. Avner also talked with the Benjaminites, the tribe of Benjamin, refreshing your memory there also. Benjamin is just here, just on the other side, next door to Judah, Judah adjacent. And they're the ones that are invested in Ish Boshet in the House of Saul. And Avner has to kind of let them know the other 11 tribes, Judah's already with David. The other 10 tribes are going to come over to David. I want you guys give up on the House of Saul. I'm sorry. it's time to unite behind David. And so he spoke to them, and Avner went and informed David in Hebron of all the wishes of Israel, the whole house of Benjamin. He won them over. And he went back to David to tell him, it's a done deal. I have campaigned the countryside, tribe by tribe. They know I am the symbol of the House of Saul. And I have openly told them that Ish Boshet is going to go along with it. And it's time all of us united behind David. And he goes back to Hebron, which you will remember is at the center of David's kingdom. This is David's little tribe there, and this is Hebron right in the middle. And he tells him, in Hebron, where David, that was his capital, at Kol HaShatov B'nei Yisrael, everything is good. Even the house of Benjamin, it's all taken care of. When Avner came to David in Hebron, accompanied by 20 men, like an escort, an entourage, David made a huge seudah, a mishteh, a party, a seudah. Mishteh conveys they were drinking wine, having a good time, and they all celebrated, like a wedding. Abner said to David, now I will go and rally all Israel to your majesty. They'll make a pact with you. You can reign over all that your heart desires. Because it has to be formalized. It's not like you just wake up the next morning, hi, I'm king. You need each, it's sort of like when the United States came into being, and one by one, each colony had to sign on and say, okay, we'll be part of this. We'll be part of this pact, and became the United States. So we need each tribe to sign on, and it will happen. So David dismissed Abner in a good way. He said, "Vayishalach David et Abner, vayelech b'shalom." So David sent him, and he sent him to go in peace. Now, here's very interesting. We're going to see if we have, again, for a lot of these things, if we have time today, otherwise next week. It's all ready for today if we have time. The rabbis pick up on the term b'shalom. B'shalom. If you don't speak or know Hebrew too well, so be it. If you know it a little bit, the usual expression is lishalom, vayelech lishalom, vayashlach lishalom. The rabbis say, when it says that someone is sent lishalom, it means he's sent in peace and he'll be returning. And when it says bishalom, it means he's sent in peace and he doesn't know it because he hasn't read the book yet. Book hasn't come out yet. But if it says bishalom, it means he's leaving in peace, but he's not coming back. He doesn't know it. We know it. B'nei David, Abdei David Yoav, Ba Me'agdud. This is new material. Next 16 verses. So first we're going to try to do all the verses, and then we're going to go through the commentaries. So the servants of David and of Yoav were returning from a sortie, a military escapade against our enemies, collecting wealth, spoils of battle. Vishalal Rav Imam Heviyu, and they brought with them great spoils, great bounty. The Avner and Enuim David b'Chevron, and at this point, as Yoav returns to David with all this wealth, Avner's no longer there. He's been sent b'Shalom. He's been sent on his way in peace. Tishalcho vayelech b'Shalom, because David has sent him b'Shalom, in peace. Again, he's not coming back. Yoav v'chol tzava asher ito ba'u, and Yoav and all of his entourage, they've come to David. Vayagidu liYoav lemor ba'Avner b'ner al-Melech vayishalchehu vayelech b'Shalom. And he was told, Yoav was told, that Avner had come, met with David, yada, 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 and he left b'Shalom. He left in peace. And Yoav is furious. He's a military general. He's not a politician. And he's also got a score to settle with Avner for killing his brother. So Yoav is angry and says, what did you do? Abner, the power behind your opposition, the House of Saul, came to you, and oh my God, what'd you do? You let him leave. You thought that Avner ben ner kilafatotcha, but don't you realize Avner came to spy on you, to deceive you, see what your weak spots are in terms of military defenses. He's there as as a fifth columnist. He came to see what's going on in the camp. He's going to go back now to Ish Boshet, and he's going to describe your weak spots. How could you let him go? So Yoav on his own departs from David and the camp, sends messengers to find Avner as he's en route back to the tribe of Benjamin to report to Ish Boshet. And they catch up with him. But David lo yada, David had no idea this is going on. That Yoav on his own is now trying to get his hands on Avner. Vayashav Avner Chevron, vayatehu Yoav el tel chashar. So Avner is caught up with by these other messengers who tell him, come back to Hebron, the capital of David, the center of this tribe, and ledaber ito bashali. He wants to meet with you privately. That's what the messengers tell Avner to trick him into. If they would have said, come back because Yoav wants to see you, he may not have come back. But he's being told, come back to the gate, everything will be fine. And when Avner came back to Hebron, Yoav slaughtered him, slew him with a sword, and Avner died bedam asa elachiv. He died for shedding the blood of Asael, Yoav's brother. Wow. So everything was going to be peace and shalom, and the Jewish nation was going to be united, and the single most important personality in the House of Saul was going to be in alliance with David and Yehudah, and now everything's blown up. Someone, not just someone, the chief of staff of David has now murdered, not killed, but murdered in cold blood, Avner. When David heard this afterwards, his first reaction was, I'm clean. I had nothing to do this. My entire country, my nation, my kingdom, and I are absolutely innocent. Mitmei Avner Bener, in terms of the killing, the murder of Avner. Yochulu Rosh Yoav et Kol Beis Aviv. May there be a smitten plague on Yoav, my chief of staff, and his entire household, his entire family. May there never end in the house of Yoav going forward. Yoav, among his children and children, may for all time to come, may he always have offspring who are smitten with leprosy, and people who die at the sword, and people who are starving short of bread, one who's slain by the sword, lacking in bread. May the house of Yoav never be without someone suffering from these different things. Meanwhile, what happened? Asael had been killed by Avner, so Yoav and his brother Avishai had retaliated by killing Avner. Because Avner had killed Asael. David issued a proclamation to Yoav, the murderer, his chief of staff, and all the nation that were with him. Everyone is to tear their clothing, the way that Jews do when they're in mourning. You are aware, perhaps, that it's a custom among Jews that when someone, God forbid, dies, a relative, and maybe a rabbi that someone studied under, we tear the garment. We tear a portion of our garment. I've talked about it in the past. The rabbi often helps the family by starting the rip. It's around your heart. If it's an immediate relative like a parent, it's over the heart. Otherwise, on the right-hand side, rabbi starts with a little pocket knife, makes a little rip, and then the mourner takes hold of that little rip with both hands, or puts a finger in and extends the rip larger. And they do what's known as kriya with an iron, tearing the garment. It's a Jewish form of mourning. Bichigru sakim. And I want everybody to go in sackcloth, which is how in biblical times, people also demonstrated mourning. Nowadays, in Western society, they wear black. You go to a funeral, everybody's wearing black, at least among the non-Jews. I don't know that that ever became a Jewish custom. The Jewish custom was never specifically to wear black. Though, if you're in Western society, if you're coming in with a brightly colored outfit, then it certainly would seem inappropriate. But the real signifying that someone's in mourning is you tear the garment, and in ancient times they put on sackcloth. That's what happened in Megillah Esther, the book of Esther, that everybody went in the streets of Shushan wearing sackcloth, led by Mordechai. V'siftu lifnei Avner, siftu from the word hesped, and I want mourning and eulogies and crying. V'hamelach David olech achrei hamita. According to Jewish law, a king is not supposed to follow a funeral bier. Let's B-I-E-R. Let's talk about that a moment. The way they did it in ancient times, nowadays, God forbid there's a death, maybe you go to the funeral at the chapel, and then everybody gets in their cars. Sometimes they all turn on their headlights, and they have a long automobile procession, a motorcade, from the site of the funeral to the cemetery. In ancient times, they didn't live such distances. There were no cars. So a person would be buried, their coffin would be placed on a wagon, a horse-drawn wagon, and the main road was not like the 405 freeway or the FDR Drive or the Long Island Expressway. The main road was the main town road, King's Highway, El Real Mac Camino, whatever it's called, Wilshire Boulevard, the main street, 7th Avenue, whatever it is. What would happen in ancient times, there was one main highway. Everybody had stores on that highway, the cobbler and the grocery store and the whatever they have. And everybody would stop. When there would be a funeral, the wagon, the horse-drawn wagon, would be going from wherever the funeral was, the hesped, the eulogy, and the wagon would be carrying, like nowadays it's typically what, a Cadillac hearse. It would be, the wagon would go down that road to the cemetery, and it would go through the main road. I don't even want to say highway, because they didn't have highways or freeways. It was the main road. And as they would be coming across the main road, there would be noise. Everybody would realize a funeral is coming. You'd hear the horses and everything. You'd hear people crying and whoa, whoa. And the custom was like at Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron. Everybody stops, stands still. Everybody goes out of the store. The entrepreneurs, the proprietors, the store, the customers, and Jewish law was you're supposed to follow the wagon. From behind the wagon, you follow the wagon for like Dalaramos, 4 cubic feet, like 6 feet. If you want to go to the burial, you go all the way. But even if you're not going to the burial, you symbolically walk about 6 feet, 4 cubits. Now, the Hebrew word for following is levaya. So when they talk in Hebrew or Yiddish about someone says, you heard about the death, I'm going to the levaya tomorrow. So the levaya modern day it means funeral. The kavura is a burial. A hesped is a eulogy. But they're going to the levaya, they're going to the funeral. Levaya, it comes from the term following. It used to be, I'm going to be following the funeral, the casket, the bier, B-I-E-R. According to halakha, the king of Israel, however, is not allowed to follow the bier because his position is considered so high. What, he's not supposed to do mitzvahs also? He is supposed to do mitzvahs, but his position is considered so high that he should not follow the bier. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. The bier. David, quote unquote, violated the usual rule as a king of Judah and possibly now the king of all Israel, and made it his business to follow the Avner casket, even though he's not supposed to. to signify, everybody would talk about, wow, the king doesn't do that. He's making the point. This is such a tragedy, and I'm so innocent of this, and I'm so heartbroken. I want everyone to take notice. I am in mourning. And it goes beyond that. I'm not going to be taking questions. I've got a lot of material right now, but at the end of the class, I will take questions, God willing. Okay, so we continue. Let's just get that off the screen as we try. Okay, so he follows, and he ordered everybody gird sackcloth, make lament, and King David himself walked behind the bier. And they buried Avner at Hebron. So even though Avner is from the house of Benjamin in Binyamin, they buried him in the community of King David in Hebron. And the king continued following the bier till they got to the graveyard, the cemetery, stood at the grave after he was buried, and cried out loud at Avner's grave. And the whole nation cried. A great hero in Israel was killed on this day. And the word konen is from kina, like on Tisha B'Av, on daytime of Tisha B'Av, we recite kinot, dirges, funeral dirges, poems that we cry. And he says how tragic that Avner has died, like Naval, that arrogant fellow back up in the former wife of Achinoam, who wouldn't give David some food, and then his wife gave food, and he died of a stroke. And David just upset. Your hands were not bound, your feet were not put in fetters, but you fell as one falls before treacherous men, publicly stating that his chief of staff, Yoav, was a treacherous man, a ben Avla. And all the troops continued to weep. Everybody, the whole nation, not troops, the whole nation continued weeping. It was the kind of thing in America, they would put a flag at half-mast. When John Kennedy was murdered in November 1963, some of us remember that all television went off the air, other than to just have 24-hour round-the-clock live coverage of what's going on in Washington, D.C. The entire country, all programming went off like Friday, I think it was Friday afternoon, and all Saturday and all Sunday until he was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. And the entire nation was fixated on that assassination and the aftermath. People saw live when Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald, and it was just an incredible week, an insane week. And people started becoming concerned about David. He wouldn't eat. And people came, his main insiders tried to get him to eat something. But Yishavad David Lemor, and David said, he took an oath, I'm not going to eat for the rest of today until sunset. I'm fasting today, like Yom Kippur. As I said, that's the way they took oaths in those days. Thus may God, he said, to do to him. I will not eat a thing, I will not taste bread or anything until this day is over, the Jewish day. So when we get to sunset, and the nation, not just the insiders, but everybody understood he's not just faking this. He did not just collaborate with Yoav to kill Avner, and now he's fake more. They saw he means it. He's really shattered. He's shattered. And the nation found great comfort in knowing that David was shattered, that they had a man rising to the kingship who had feelings and sensitivities and who could not bear what just happened. The entire nation was practically relieved by this. And everybody was absolutely convinced and persuaded that the murder of Avner, David had nothing to do with it. And David spoke to his servants and said, I want you all to know that a great man, a great prince of Israel, fell today among the people of Israel. Even though I am the anointed to be king, I am broken today. And as for Yoav and his brother, these the sons of Tz'ruyah, Yoav ben Tz'ruyah, Abishai ben Tz'ruyah, these sons of Tz'ruyah, it's a name, Yoav and his brother, Kashimimani, they are savage, they're difficult, savage, and I cannot control them. And indeed, throughout his entire life, he never felt strong enough to control Yoav. Yishalem Hashem li'osei hara'ah karato. So I have to hand this one off to God. I don't have the strength to fight them. Remember that Ish Boshet did not have the strength to fight his commander-in-chief, Avner. And David perceived that he did not have the strength to fight Yoav. And this feeling was so strong that now we're in book of 2 Samuel, Shmuel Bet. After the end of Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel, the Bible continues into Melachim Aleph, 1 Kings. In 1 Kings chapter 2, David is on his deathbed. So this is decades and decades and decades later. Vayikrevu Yemei David Lamut, by Shlomo ben Olimor, he was succeeded by his son Solomon. As David's final days came, people surrounded his deathbed, and he gave like a final command to his son Solomon. Anochi holech b'derech kol aretz. He says, I now am about to proceed on the journey that all people ultimately proceed on. V'chazakta v'hayita le'ish. You're still a young boy, comparatively. Now you're going to be king over all Israel. You have to get strong, and you have to be ready to be tough. V'shomarta et mishmerta Hashem Elokecha lelechet b'drachav l'shmor chukotav mitzvotav mishutav edutav. I'm commanding you that you're going to be the king of Israel. You must follow in the ways of God, to honor and to observe his laws, statutes, commandments, judgments, testimonies, as all are written in the Torah of Moshe. L'man taskilit kol asher ta'aseh v'kol asher tifnei. That will make you wise. It will give you insight, and so on and so forth. And furthermore, in these last words, before he dies, God will fulfill the promise that was made concerning me if your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walk before me faithfully with all their heart and soul. Your line on the throne of Israel shall never end. V'gam ata yadata et asha asali Yoav ben Tz'ruyah. And furthermore, on the deathbed, he says, you, Solomon, know what Yoav, the son of Tz'ruyah, did to me. Asher asali shnei sorit sivot Yisrael Avner ben Ner lamasa ben Yeter ha'argim. We're not going to talk about Amasa ben Yeter now, but what he did to Avner, what we're learning today, decades and decades and decades ago, how he killed them, how he killed Avner, by Asem Demei Melchama b'Shalom, and he took a moment of peace and almost forced us all to descend in the blood of war. He was ready to sink all of the Jewish people into a bloody war. And therefore, therefore, I am commanding you, he says on his deathbed, don't let Yoav die in peace. See that his white hair does not go down in peace. I want you to see that I don't care how you kill him. I couldn't do it. You've got to do it. David never forgave him for this, never forgave Yoav. So we've learned a lot of chapter 3, and now we can start getting into additional commentaries that will add so much more information. Here we go. First of all, when Avner followed David, so the question became, what was that all about? And why ultimately was Avner punished that God allowed for Avner to be killed early? According to the way of things, Yoav killed him, but God could have made things different. And the rabbis perceived that Avner died partly the natural way through political intrigue, Yoav and revenge, And partly Avner had death coming to him. And there are many, many opinions. What were the sins of Avner that brought about his early demise, or that led God not to interfere with the way of things? Radak here at chapter 3, verse 12 says, V'yesh darash, there are those rabbis who believe, shekotav b'chitvola David. I've told you this in the past. Avner, when he came to meet with David, first sent a written note. I'm going to be coming, and I'm going to be offering you the kingdom. And in his note, he wrote, Min Avner le David. This letter, I told you this last time, from Avner to David. And that was considered disrespectful. Hikdim Shemo l'shem David. He should have said to David from Avner. Instead, from Avner to David. He put his name before David, Zehu, El David Tachtav, Lefichach Nenash Avner. And that's one opinion. We continue. And I taught you last time I brought this up. We have to be so careful how we speak. Because, look, that's not the mainstream opinion as to why God allowed him to be killed. But the rabbis add that. And it's a reminder to all of us, we have to be so careful how we speak, especially when speaking about people protecting Israel, defending rabbis, teaching Torah. We can't be nonchalant. We have to speak about, and I talked to you this last time, how we referred to rabbis in third person. I told you about how I would refer to Rav Tendler as Rav Tendler in the sense of if not only I, but all of us in his Talmud class in the Smicha ordination program, if he taught something, we had a question, we'd say, he would call on me and I would say, yes, Rav Tendler just taught us, and I would like to ask Rav Tendler the following question. And I'm talking to him. The same way that people speaking to a king don't call him by his name or even say Charles or whatever, or Elizabeth. They'll say His Honor, His Majesty. There's a certain way to speak. And this is one thing. Next. This is another Radak. By Dabrigam Avner Biosnei ben Yamin. It says that Avner spoke with the people of Benjamin to win them over to accepting that David now, it's his time. The Afal Pisha Shevet ben Yamin, Hayu Krovim Lebeit Shaul. Even though the tribe of Benjamin was going to be the last ones to accept that the House of Saul was losing its monarchy and it was being handed over to the tribe of Judah, Shevet Yehuda, and David, Avner felt he could win them over, and he did. Hayu yoter chafetzim b'malchut David b'pnei shira'u shehaya matzliach b'chol derachav u'b'chol milchamatav. Even the Benjaminites were more inclined to accept the transfer to David, because they saw that David was succeeding in everything he did. God was blessing his every effort with success and his battles. And if I could use like a contemporary example, and I'm not going to take sides, so I'll say it both ways. It would be like this November, there's going to be a presidential election, and the Republicans for Trump are going to vote for him, and the Democrats for Biden are going to vote for him. And there are going to be people in the middle. We keep partisan politics out of our Torah classes. I refer to politics because these things are politics. A king is being assassinated. There's political intrigue. So I have to make reference. But I try to be nonpartisan in my classes. So the Republicans for Trump are going to vote for Trump. Democrats for Biden are going to vote for Biden. And then there are people in the middle. There are going to be a lot of Biden voters from 2020 who are going to vote for Trump. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. But it's a common thing they're finding in surveys. A lot of people that don't like Trump are going to vote for Trump because they feel that gasoline is $6 a gallon and food has gone through the roof. And they don't like the fact that the world seems in chaos. And maybe none of it is Biden's fault, because I don't want to get into the politics of it. But there's a sense of, I don't want Trump. I don't like Trump. But I can't continue this way under Biden. And Trump seemed to know what he was doing. And again, I'm not saying that speaks for me. But that's what Benjamin was feeling. We'd rather have the House of Saul. The thing is, the House of Saul is falling apart. And we have Philistines to deal with. And we would rather have David, quite frankly. even if it means losing our family and the House of Saul. We'd rather have a king who wins, and we'd rather have a king who wins rather than just dragging along. And so what he's saying is, Hayu yoter chafetz b'malchut David b'pnei shera'u shayu matzliach shaya matzliach b'chol drachav v'chol mochatav. They saw that David was succeeding in all of his efforts, all of his wars, and furthermore, v'ra'u ki beit Shaul hayu holchim u'mitma'atim. They saw at the same time that the House of Saul was becoming less and less significant and becoming more minor and more unsuccessful. Below hayalahem siman yafeh b'mlucha. And they saw that we gave Ish Boshet a chance, and he's just not succeeding in his kingdom. V'od ki Avner hu hitat levavam acharei David. Furthermore, the Benjaminites followed Abner to David because he persuaded them. But Nesharat hashlimimo, he wanted peace. He wanted peace, and he saw it was time for David to become the king of Israel. We now go to Midrash Tehillim 18. Again, at the end of class, I will leave time for questions. We go to Midrash Tehillim 18. That it talks briefly. I highlighted this for you when I read the text. VeHaKadosh Baruch Hu kor'o eved. When someone is a servant of God, which is a tremendous, tremendous compliment, and calls himself God's servant, God reciprocates and calls that person his servant. At Motzei, you see, you find in the Bible, Shekol Mishu Kori Atzmo Eved, Kor'o HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eved. You find throughout the Bible, whenever a righteous person calls himself God's servant, God later calls that person my servant. Abraham, Hara Eratzmo, Evet. In Genesis 18:3, Vayomer Adonai Namatzatechem B'necha Al Natavor Me'al Avdecha. Abraham said, "If it please you, do not go past your servant." So he called God. He called himself a servant of God. In reciprocity, God referred to him by Omar. Oh no, let's get that one back up. Okay, get rid of that. And reciprocally, God then referred to him. Okay, they don't have a link. But Avor Avraham Avdi. He referred to Abraham, my servant. Yaakov, Jacob, referred to himself as Asher Asita et Avdecha. I am your servant. I'm grateful for the miracles you've done for your servant, namely me, Jacob. VaKadosh Baruch Hu kora'oho eved. So God reciprocated, referring in Isaiah 44, verse 2, Ko Amar Hashem Osechav, etc., etc., Al Tira Avdi Yaakov. Fear not my servant Jacob. Because Jacob called himself God's servant, he was honored that God called him, and the same happens furthermore with Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our father. But let's now get to David. David Kara Atzmo Eved. In Tehillim 116:16. In Psalms 116:16, David wrote the Psalms, most of them, not all of them. So in one of us said, "O Lord, I am your servant. Ana Hashem ki ani avdecha, ani avdecha ben amatechta, pitachta l'mosei ra." You may recognize that from Tehillim, from Hallel, that we recite on certain festivals in Rosh Chodesh and on Hanukkah. "O Lord, I'm your servant, the son of your maidservant. You've undone the cords and bound me." So because David referred to himself in writing the Psalms as God's servant, we just read tonight in Shmuel Bet 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 18, that God referred to David as his servant. Okay. Next. David, furthermore, goes, I mentioned this, that it says that David sent him to go in peace. And somewhere else, it refers to in the book of Shemot, the father-in-law of Moshe was Jethro. Jethro was Zipporah's father. When Moshe fled Egypt after killing an Egyptian taskmaster who was beating a Jewish slave to death, he fell upon the Midianites, ended up in the tent of the high priest of Midian, Yitro, who married him off to his daughter Zipporah. Later on, Moshe goes back to Egypt. let my people go, the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea. And now there's the divine revelation. And Yitro comes from Midian to catch up with the Jewish encampment and to be with them all. And he's with them for a while. And then Moshe says, Lech l'shalom, go back in peace. Thank you for visiting. Kol mi shekatuv bo l'shalom, holech v'chozer. V'kol mi shekatuv bo lech b'shalom, holech v'eino chozer. And whoever goes and it says b'shalom, is I showed you with Avner, he never came back. By contrast, Yitro came back. Okay. Now we're going to have like time for maybe one or two more, maybe see what we can get in here. And then, as I said, questions. So this is a Malbim. This is a Malbim on chapter 3, verse 24. This is where Yoav is yelling at David. How did you let him go? Avner is a spy. How could you let him go? Ta'anato haya she'imo Yoav emer Avner mored b'malchuto b'malcho. Yoav is saying, David, you believe he really is turning on Ish Boshet, the House of Saul, and coming to you to hand you the kingship? You really believe that? If Avner really were abandoning the House of Saul, why would he now have asked your permission to leave so that he could go back to Ish Boshet and report to him? He should be terrified to go back to Ish Boshet. Ish Boshet will have him executed perhaps as a traitor. He should be staying under your wings. The very fact that he requested permission to go back to Ish Boshet and now is going back to Ish Boshet shows he's a fifth columnist. The Anatohaya, Yoav was arguing to David, if Avner truly were turning against his king, and if he truly were going against Ish Boshet's desires and preferences, well, in that case, Avner would be very afraid to go back to Ish Boshet's home. Because certainly the king, Ish Boshet, will have him killed for having entered into an agreement with the other side. Now Yoav is not privy to the reality that Ish Boshet has caved in, is terrified of Avner, will not have Avner killed. In fact, already has handed over Michal, the daughter of Saul, and is given up. Yoav is thinking, from what I'm seeing, I was out with my men on a sortie, and we were gathering bounty and bringing wealth to, I don't know what was going on. I just heard Avner came here. You made a party, you sent him home. I don't know the whole story, but it seems to me, if he was committing treason, which is what it sounds like, against his king, or at least what he was representing to you, he'd never be going back. So obviously he's going back. Don't you see what's going on? It would have been appropriate for him to stay here under your wings rather than go back and risk execution. And that's the meaning of what Yoav was saying. How could you let him go? The fact that he's going back to Ish Boshet implies, indeed it does, that Ish Boshet is aware of what's going on, which in fact he was, but not in the way that Yoav understood. Yoav is inferring that Ish Boshet was aware that he sent a spy, and now the spy is coming back. In fact, what happened is Ish Boshet is aware that he's losing his kingdom. He's just given up his sister Michal, and he's going to get the final word that it's time to pack up the belongings and go. So Yoav, that was his thinking. So here we have Rashi. Well, skip the Rashi there. And we'll skip that one too. And we will start with this one next week. We have about 6 more commentaries, and then we go beyond it. And let me just go back for questions and to wrap up. So what we're finding today is the following. There could have been a very peaceful transition. Sometime in America, we're going through political hell right now. And I'm not looking forward to the day after the November elections. The whole thing is a mess. And again, I want to avoid taking sides, being partisan, but I think we all recognize we're going down a road that we better figure out how to get off as a country, because if we don't watch out, next thing you know, every time there's a change of government, the losing side is going to be brought to, 5, 10 different federal trials, and it's going to become like a banana republic where we throw into prison whoever was the last president, and we're not going to have proper transitions. And this is all part of the overall atmosphere of chaos that has taken over this country in the last 20 years, where people no longer know how to respectfully disagree. And although the university riots are certainly a strong symbol of it, that's not the only place it's going on. When I went to college, when we all went to college, we knew people that we disagreed with very vehemently, whatever the issue was. And we talked about it, and we disagreed, and we had friendships. And maybe they're not our best friends. Some cases they were, but we could talk to people and disagree. And this is very bad stuff. And this is what they were afraid of as the transition's taking place. Are we going to have a nice, peaceful transition? Because it's very iffy when a kingship, it's hard enough when there's an election and votes are counted. And the question is whether honestly counted, not honestly. I don't want to get into that either. When there's, like in the old days, you had a presidential election, one side wins, the other one loses. The loser goes out of the House, the other one goes into the White House. At the inauguration, they're all sitting there together. That's a big thing. We took it for granted until it's no longer to be taken for granted. And it's the first time there's ever been a transition. And David was hoping for a peaceful transition. And he's terrified by what happened. It emerges that Yoav had a personal score to settle. On the other hand, in God's eyes, David, his servant, had been acting righteously, but Avner had done some things that were wrong. He had not treated David with proper respect in the way he addressed him. Is that the reason to have him killed? We'll learn from some of the commentators next week. There were other reasons far more important. But we're learning that people are people, and freedom and peace is so tentative, is so eggshell-like. People have to be very vigilant to maintain peace, because all it can take is one angry person to throw everything off so incredibly that David carried that pain, not only by fasting and following the funeral bier and crying, and he carried it with him till the day of his death, telling his young son, you would expect that the last will would be the last charge, be a great king, be wise, follow the people and show the people leadership, be spiritual, a lot of which he did say. And then he tags on, and settle my score with Yoav, because that's got to be settled. It hit him that deeply. Janet, what's up? Janet, you have a question or a comment?
Number one, on the Kriya. So how does that compare to the description Kriyat Shema?
Okay, the word Kriya with an ayin, kuf resh yud ayin hey, means tearing. Kuf resh yud aleph hey means reading or calling, or reading or calling. So Kriyat Shema with an aleph is reading the Shema, which we do in our prayers. Kriya with an ayin means tearing, like tearing a garment or tearing a piece of paper. They sound similar. What do we call them? Homonyms. It's like the word K-N-I-G-H-T is like a knight of the round table. And then N-I-G-H-T sounds identical. That's the opposite of day, is night. And there are many words like that in English that sound identical but have different meanings.
Number two, the fact that David, it just doesn't seem consistent that David can't handle Yoav. I mean, with just a slingshot, he got Goliath. And
Isn't it?
and also the consistency of that's why everyone didn't want Ish Boshet, because David's consistently hitting the Plishtim.
He felt that he needed, keep in mind, it's a very good question. David was a lot of the people that fight for you, physically fight for you, not politically fight for you, but physically fight for you. A lot of them are not disciplined, especially in ancient times. Nowadays, you have all these ethics of war and Geneva Conventions and the way they fight and the rules and everything. But for those of us who have studied history, forget about Jewish history, the Middle Ages, the British and the English and the French and the Italians and the Germans, and not to mention the Japanese with their samurai and Native Americans, the Indian tribes, what they did to each other, the Sioux and the Navajo and the Seminole and the Creek and the Cherokee, what they did to each other, scalping each other. A lot of fighters in the old days, they did not fight with the same kinds of ethics, and they were very hard to keep under control, but you needed them. It's not like today, where if somebody's wild, the modern day ethic is you have to lock them up, you throw them out, you throw them out of your army. In those days, you needed everybody you could get who could fight. And David needed Yoav to keep them under control. And perhaps David even was afraid that Yoav could end up creating a military coup, which always, from ancient times to the modern era, that's always out there, the chance of a powerful general executing a military coup. Now, could David have fought him and beat him? Maybe. David, for whatever reason, felt unsure that he could beat him, just as we see that Ish Boshet felt he could not fight Avner. It's an interesting question. I always wondered that myself. He was King David, but he was afraid. And we will find in a few weeks or months when David gets driven out of his palace by one of his renegade sons, Absalom, and his son will lead an insurrection and initially will win and drive David and his household out of the country, actually trying to kill him. And David, running for his life, will get across the Jordan to the other side. And eventually they will regroup and come back and retake the kingdom. But David never could have retaken the kingdom without Yoav. He knew he needs Yoav. It wasn't just a matter of killing one guy like Goliath, but to run that country and have a military that could fight the Philistines and support him, he needed Yoav. He also could have used Avner, but he definitely needed Yoav. Thanks for
And
your,
then
yeah,
and then finally,
finally.
it's interesting how different things hit different people. To me, the fact that he put on his son to have the final resolution with Avner is insensitive, that it was his, as you say, deep issue. And also that he wasn't, after saying all the curses of Avner's family, all those succession of things, that he didn't show faith that Hashem would execute that, and he left it to Shlomo rather than saying this is in God's hands. That also, I don't know, that seems insensitive and a little bit of a wobbliness.
Sometimes you hand over to your kids, whatever it was, whatever loose ends you left behind. And then Shlomo has the choice to hand it over to his kids later on, or to see whether, because 40 years or so have passed, Yoav is older now and more beatable now. But, if you think about it, if 30, 40 years have passed, for David to kill him now over something that happened 30 or 40 years ago is incredibly bad politics. The question is, can Shlomo be wise enough? You remember Shlomo, Solomon, the wisdom of Solomon, Solomon, the wisest of all men. And what David really is saying is, I see in you a wisdom that I have never seen in any person. And to this day, Solomon's adjective is Solomon the wise. And he's saying, you can't just go and kill him, but you're so wise, I couldn't figure out an opening to kill him that would not have massive repercussions. I'm asking you, in your wisdom, to find an opportunity to take him down. And he will. That's all I want to give away for now, which is already a lot. Thanks, everybody, for being here and for coming back, and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.